Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, villagers, shields, desolators, peasants, vassals, minions, snapping Turks. I'm a useful idiot. Welcome. And today I want to talk about this surprising move by Turkey. We now have Turkish F-16s making airstrikes against Kurdish positions inside Turkey. And a reminder, the Kurds we're talking about in Turkey are the PKK, which is the armed wing of Turkish Kurdish resistance inside Turkey. And this is a conflict that's been going on since at least 1984 with over 40,000 lives lost. And as I've mentioned in other videos, we have the United States, the EU, and Turkey, who all consider the PKK terrorists. Although, interestingly, the United States, of course, is working with the PKK, who are fighting against ISIS in Iraq. And ostensibly, the United States is supporting, with airstrikes, is supporting the Syrian Kurds, sometimes comprising members of the PKK that are in Syria. So, once again, a very interesting situation we find ourselves in. So this happened in the Hakkari province of Turkey. And Turkey claims that these airstrikes were done after PKK attacks on a Turkish military outpost. And on top of this, we've had over 30 people died in clashes between the government, Islamists who support ISIS, and Kurdish protesters. And then so this is inflamed the situation and derailed a year-long ceasefire that is more or less held for the time being. And so now we have the PKK are moving forces back from Iraq, Kurdistan and Iraq, back into Turkey. So as I speculated in my previous video about Kobani falling, changing everything for the Kurds, we're seeing the results right away. And certainly these Turkish airstrikes on PKK positions, in the midst of everything else that's going on and all the complexities of these alliances and strange bedfellows that we find in this situation, it just gets all the more complicated. And we know that Turkey essentially wants to sacrifice Kobani. In fact, for them, it's pitting one group, terrorist group, against another group, the PKK or the Syrian Kurdish militias against ISIS. And in fact, one of the spokesmen for Turkey, in fact, I think it was Erdogan himself, spoke of the fact that the PKK and ISIS are essentially the same thing, and the world needs to react to the PKK as well. And this rings just about as hollow as the claims by Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel that Hamas and ISIS are the same thing. And once again, we get into this gray area between who are considered terrorists and who are considered freedom fighters. And the situation between all the alliances in this region right now fighting ISIS amply displays the complexity of this and just how fickle it is. And we see Erdogan and Netanyahu essentially eliciting the same sort of lexicon in order to demonize the necessary opponents inside their countries. And so once again, it also shows the hollowness of who is making the charges of terrorists. So let's not be so quick to judge all these groups that all these governments around the world tell you are terrorists, because I've also pointed out in many videos, a lot of governments are taking the opportunity to label any opposition whatsoever as some form of terrorism. Even copyright infringement is considered economic terrorism these days. And so every time we find a situation where in Turkey the PKK are called terrorists, perhaps they're freedom fighters, just as the jihadis in Afghanistan in the 80s fighting the Soviet Union were freedom fighters and lauded by the likes of Ronald Reagan, and yet now they are terrorists. And then we also have Netanyahu labeling Hamas as a terrorist group when they are an occupation resistance group and hardly an outside force. So to claim they're terrorists fighting against the state of Israel, they are occupied province, and therefore under Israeli jurisdiction. But I digress. But I think that's an important point to bring up in the midst of all this discussion of Turkey taking on the PKK in the midst of the United States supporting the PKK in Iraq and Syria shows that everybody is going to follow their own agendas, and we've seen this clearly with countries like Israel and Saudi Arabia, Iran, and all the rest involved, and then all of their various satellite organizations and proxy armies and the like. So, and then now that we have the latest step is Turkey has closed the border to Kobani because they assume that anybody left in Kobani is a terrorist or a Kurdish fighter, and therefore is not going to be allowed into Turkey. And incidentally, Turkey is also responsible for restricting any Kurdish fighters from going through Turkey or leaving Turkey to go support the fighters in Kobani, so making the Kurdish fighters there all the more doomed not being able to receive any support because of the Turkish border being closed. But now we have the border being closed completely, and just once again, the Turks are more than happy to have Kobani fall, and their two nemesis, ISIS and PKK, kill each other, or the YPG, as the case may be. So there we have it. All the more complex. We have Turkey sacrificing the city of Kobani, the United States airstrike strategy around Kobani, relatively ineffective at this point. And now we have Turkey taking advantage of this situation to address its own Kurdish problem inside of Turkey. And once again, we have a number of countries in this region all conspiring to keep their Kurdish regions pressed one way or another. And Turkey, of course, is making sure that Syrian Kurds remain somewhat oppressed so that they have fewer problems with the Kurds in their own country. And Iran has some of the same interests because they also have a Kurdish population. So all the more food for thought looking at these events unfold. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too?